Today's briefing on the federal response to anti-Asian racism. And our panelists are members of law enforcement and current and former federal officials. I'll repeat what I said before, and that is each panelist gets, well, this time more time, actually, because there's only 3 of you. So take as much time as you want.
2 of them are by Zoom.
Oh, 4 of them. Okay, but
5.
still.
5.
We have 2 by Zoom. All right. Belay that order. We will each have 7 minutes in which to testify, and when the warning lights come on, please pay attention to these lights up here to give you some guidance as to how much time you've got left. And then after you've all testified, we'll ask the commissioners to ask panelists any questions they may have. The panelists in this panel are Eric Dryband, former Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice and current partner at a small firm called Jones Day. Devin Westhill, former Assistant Secretary of Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and current President and General Counsel of the Center for Equal Opportunity. Say hello to Roger for me. Detective Orlando Martinez. There we go. Hate Crimes Coordinator for the LAPD. And we have by Zoom, William Scott, Police Chief for San Francisco, and the lovely and talented Michael Yaki, former member of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Welcome. Mr. Dryband.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the Commission, and thank you for inviting me to today's briefing. My name is Eric Dryband, and I'm a partner at the law firm of Jones Day in Washington, D.C. I served as the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division at the United States Department of Justice from 2018 to 2021, and I'm here today at your invitation to speak about the federal response to anti-Asian discrimination in the United States. While my discussion today will focus in part on hate crimes, during my tenure at the Justice Department, we prosecuted other crimes that sought justice for Asians and Asian American victims. And for example, in the area of human trafficking, the department convicted several defendants for operating an international sex trafficking organization that coerced hundreds of Thai women into engaging in commercial sex acts across the United States. And I want to focus, though, today on our response to the issues that occurred during the pandemic. And in the very early stages of the pandemic, in March of 2020, Attorney General William Barr and I instructed Justice Department prosecutors across the United States that the department would not tolerate hate-motivated acts of violence, including any such acts against Asians and Asian Americans. On April 9, 2020, I announced publicly that the department would not tolerate civil rights violations during the pandemic, and I explained that the Justice Department's pandemic-related work includes enforcing disability rights laws, protecting religious liberty, and prosecuting hate crimes. I also explained that because the coronavirus originated in China, some people have targeted Asian Americans and Asians simply because of their ethnicity, and that this conduct has no place in America. And I added, the Justice Department will prosecute hate crimes and violations of anti-discrimination laws against Asian Americans, Asians, and others to the fullest extent of the law. Next, on April 27, 2020, Attorney General Barr directed me and Matthew Schneider, who was then the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, to oversee and coordinate our efforts to monitor state and local policies, and if necessary, take action to correct them. Attorney General Barr stated, quote, "The Constitution is not suspended in times of crisis. We must therefore be vigilant to ensure its protections are preserved at the same time that the public is protected." During my remaining time at the Justice Department, the Civil Rights Division and the United States Attorney partners across the country led the department's efforts to investigate and address civil rights issues related to the pandemic and other issues, including issues about anti-Asian discrimination. In 2020, my last full year at the department charged the highest number of hate crimes cases in 2 decades. We encountered another form of anti-Asian discrimination during my tenure at the Justice Department, namely discrimination against Asian American applicants to Harvard and Yale colleges. In the Harvard case, the department launched an investigation after Asian American applicants complained about alleged discrimination by Harvard. The department also supported the plaintiffs in a private lawsuit brought against Harvard. When the district court ruled in favor of Harvard, the plaintiffs appealed. We filed a brief in support of the plaintiffs in the Court of Appeals. Our brief asserted that Harvard's race discrimination and its expansive use of race in admissions was unlawful, that Harvard actively engaged in unlawful racial balancing, that Harvard's admissions officers consistently and inexplicably scored Asian American applicants lower than other applicants on an entirely subjective personal rating. And Asian American applicants, it was clear in the record, to Harvard ranked the highest in academic and extracurricular qualifications. And given the results of the personal ratings, Harvard expected us to believe that the same applicants lack courage, integrity, confidence, perseverance, and leadership qualities compared to other applicants. Yet Harvard had no explanation for the disparities in the personal ratings. I appeared personally at oral argument on behalf of the United States before the Court of Appeals and explained that Harvard illegally monitored the evolving racial composition of the class at every stage of the process, illegally to produce a racially balanced class. I emphasized that Harvard pervasively and illegally used race at every step of its process. The court affirmed the district court's decision, and the case is pending before the Supreme Court of the United States, with a decision expected probably in the end of June of this year. In the Yale case, the department investigated allegations that Yale University violated the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by the widespread acts of unlawful race and national origin discrimination in college admissions. On August 13, 2020, the department determined that Yale violated the Civil Rights Act's prohibitions against race and national origin discrimination. The department also determined that Yale's multi-decade use of race continues unabated without any serious effort by Yale to consider an admissions process that is free of race discrimination. When we announced the department's determination in the Yale case, I said publicly, quote, "There is no such thing as a nice form of race discrimination. Unlawfully dividing Americans into racial and ethnic blocs fosters stereotypes, bitterness, and division. We were unable to reach a resolution with Yale, and so on October 8, 2020, the department sued Yale. The complaint alleged that Yale illegally discriminated against applicants to Yale College on the grounds of race and national origin, and that Yale's discrimination injured racially disfavored applicants, including, in particular, most Asian American and white applicants. The complaint also alleged that Yale injured African American and Asian American applicants by the use of racial stereotypes and racial balancing. When we filed suit against Yale, I observed that for centuries, people from all over the world have left their ancestral homes and come to the United States hoping that they and their families could enjoy equal opportunity and pursue the American dream. Countless Americans have pursued their dreams through higher education, and they continue to do so. And all persons who apply for admission to colleges and universities should expect and know that they will be judged by their character, talents, and achievements, and not the color of their skin. To do otherwise is to permit our institutions to foster stereotypes, bitterness, and division. After I left the Department of Justice, the department moved to dismiss the case against Yale. And with that, I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dryban. Mr. Westhill.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this important subject. I'm honored to be here. It's very important to me. I am Devin Westhill. I run the Center for Equal Opportunity, which is an organization that for almost 30 years has advocated for colorblind non-discrimination in America. My primary concern today is how the federal government regards the civil rights of Asian Americans and that of other Americans who, as a result of their racial or ethnic identity, are treated differently, contrary to the American guarantee of equal protection under the law. In particular, I'm worried about efforts to promote the concept of equity in many spheres of American life, but I'll focus my remarks primarily on the federal government's activities. First, I'll describe and comment on a few examples of the Biden administration equity agenda, some of which I've already heard about today. You can find more in my written statement, of course. Then I'll describe what the concept of equity entails. Then I'll explain why I think it's problematic for the protection of civil rights, especially for Asian Americans. I close by briefly suggesting a better way forward and what this distinguished body can do to address the issues I identify. So on January 20th, 2021, just hours into office, President Biden signed an executive order to establish an ambitious whole-of-government equity agenda, signaling that in his administration there would be a major effort to coordinate efforts to embed equity principles, policies, and approaches across the federal government. Within the same week, the president issued a memo essentially condemning anti-Asian racism and admitting that the federal government deserves some blame for it. However, almost all of the administration's actions to further the government's interest in equity have been at odds with that memo. For example, February 3rd, 2021, the Department of Justice dropped its lawsuit filed by the Justice Department in the previous administration against Yale University, alleging anti-Asian discrimination in admissions. This was only a few months after the Justice Department claimed, based on, quote, voluminous admissions data it reviewed, that Yale University violated and is continuing to violate Title VI by discriminating on the basis of race and national origin in its undergraduate admissions. That Yale's discrimination is longstanding and ongoing and significantly disfavors Asian Americans. On June 25, 2021, President Biden signed another EO to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility to, quote, determine whether and to what extent agency practices result in inequitable employment outcomes rather than unequal employment opportunities. On December 8, 2021, the Biden Justice Department urged unsuccessfully the Supreme Court to decline taking 2 cases alleging discrimination in admissions against Asian applicants to Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, one of my alma maters. Later, the Biden administration urged the court to rule against the group of Asian American petitioners challenging race discrimination in Harvard University admissions in both briefing materials and oral argument. Just last month, and we heard earlier today in this briefing, President Biden signed yet another EO on advancing government-wide equity. Vice President Kamala Harris expressed on her official Twitter account her thoughts behind the motivation for the directive. Quote, America is the promise of equity and justice for all. Today, President Biden signed an executive order that puts our nation one step closer to achieving that promise, end quote. It was a telling admission that the current administration has perhaps less commitment to our Pledge of Allegiance's promise of liberty and justice for all. Indeed, Vice President Harris's change in terminology comports with the Biden administration equity fixation. In fact, in the most recent EO, for example, equity is mentioned 63 times, but liberty gets no mention at all. It's not just executive actions, memoranda, and court cases that make up the Biden equity agenda. The administration has pushed equity legislative priorities, such as granting only farmers of color debt relief, federal programs, corporate board representation, and more aggressive reporting on and gathering of, quote, equitable data. The federal government's equity agenda appears to consist of identifying disparities in outcomes and attempting to close them by preferential treatment based on race or other immutable characteristics, such as ancestral lineage. That's immoral, it's illegal, and it's undeniable that the federal government has put forward massive efforts to deliver on it. Equity is not equality. The currently fashionable term equity is not contained in our civil rights laws, and one might question to seek to investigate. Given that equity initiatives target federally protected classes, whether equity initiatives might frustrate or impede civil rights protection and enforcement. Indeed, equity is not synonymous with equality. We need look no further than top government officials' own pronouncements to learn this. For example, on November 1, 2020, once again, Vice President Kamala Harris tweeted a video from her official government Twitter page where she acknowledged, quote, there's a big difference between equality and equity. Equality suggests, quote, oh, everyone should get the same amount. Equitable treatment means we all end up in the same place. I say believe them when they say the quiet part out loud. Contrary to the focus on equity-engineered outcomes, equality of opportunity seeks to remove barriers that otherwise close doors to opportunity. I have firsthand experience as a leader of the Civil Rights Program at USDA. There, for example, we redesigned and implemented a better department-wide reasonable accommodation policy for Americans with disabilities, thereby opening the door of opportunity to people putting their talents to work for the public interest. I have more examples. The insistence that we must produce equal outcomes among groups defined by skin color, national origin, or gender perverts the American understanding of justice based on individual rights. It's achievable only by substituting authoritarian methods that trample those rights. And there's no good reason to believe that people or groups of people should even all end up in the same place, as Vice President Kamala Harris has said. This brings me to my main point. Asian Americans are a disfavored group under the equity regime because of their success. Equity initiatives, as discussed, seek to reach proportional outcomes for groups. That is especially problematic for Asian Americans in certain areas of American life within which they succeed in disproportionate numbers. Many Asian Americans are culturally dedicated to academic achievement and family cohesion. That devotion has led to representation in fields that outstrip their proportion to the general population. So in a system where outcomes must reflect proportionality, Asian Americans can occupy only their proportional share, approximately 7%. Achieving equitable outcomes means both providing preferences to artificially inflate the proportion of and lowering standards for certain groups, and also bringing down other overrepresented races like Asian Americans to their proportion of the population. These are the two sides of the same equity coin. Neither side can be satisfied without violating federal civil rights laws or the constitutional principle of equal protection under the law, since both require divvying us up by race. My invitation to participate in this briefing requested I address the federal response to anti-Asian racism in the United States. Sadly, as I lay out, the federal government is one of the great purveyors of discrimination against Asian Americans and other accomplished ethnic groups in this country via its equity agenda. The question is what this body will do about it. In conclusion to this statement, I list a number of actions. I won't list them right now. They're in my written statement. The Commission can and should take to address this discriminatory equity agenda. However, I'd be remiss if I didn't first comment on another major problem. The problem is that these efforts, equity efforts, mask fundamental reasons and stifle efforts to address why there are a disproportionate number of certain groups underperforming in certain ways. An undue focus on an outcome-driven approach can paper over structural issues within certain demographic populations that contribute to a failure to meet standards such as in hiring, contracting, college acceptance, promotions, et cetera. Such obfuscation can in turn lead to these issues being neglected, with minorities perhaps the most acutely affected. We have seen this problem exacerbated in the decades of unsuccessful racial preference experiments in higher education. And with that, I will report back to Roger Clegg. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westhill. Detective Martinez.
Thank you for having me. I want to take my time to kind of explain the perspective from a line officer or line investigator of how these cases get, these anti-Asian cases get classified or not as hate crimes or bias-motivated crimes. Bias-motivated crime is a criminal offense motivated in whole or in part, this is state, by the actual or perceived legally protected characteristic of the victim. These can be race, nationality, ethnicity, religion, disability, immigration status, sexual orientation, gender, and gender identity. In my state, age is not protected, political ideology is not protected, being a police officer is not a protected characteristic. A hate crime includes any willful act that by force or threat of force injures, intimidates, interferes with another person's civil right. So what does that mean? Most people do not know what our civil rights are, including line officers. So the easiest way to think of it is a bias-motivated crime occurs when someone commits a crime with part of the reason being because of their protected characteristic, a bias against their protected characteristic. Federally, if the crime would have occurred anyways, when you remove the bias, it does not count as a federal hate crime. It does not count under that statute. But a lot of states have difference where we're in whole or in part. Like I said, the average person, patrol officer, person who calls 911, they don't know what their civil rights are. All they're calling is the police because they're scared, they're being attacked, they're worried about their safety. They don't report being the victims of hate crimes. When the officers arrive, they have to meet the elements of whatever statute. So you may have the criminal offense against them and additional either direct or circumstantial evidence to show that the criminal offense is also bias motivated. 99.9% of our determinations are made by the officers in the field, the supervisors in the field, or the investigators after they get the case. Folks are not just second largest police department, second largest city. People are not calling 911 saying, I am the victim of a hate crime. Is it a violation of our civil rights if someone vandalizes our property? Is it if someone spits on us, if someone screams on us? Like I said, most people don't know these things. The bias motivation is a thought crime. It is the suspect's intent. We have to prove that through direct evidence or circumstantial evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the suspect committed the crime because of the bias against the protected characteristic. This is extremely difficult when the underlying crime is a misdemeanor. You have the two types of crimes, a misdemeanor and a felony. Search warrants do not apply to misdemeanor offenses except for certain exceptions. So when us as officers are trying to get that proof to prove the bias, whether it's social media posts or to look through someone's phone to see if they had been texting someone to plan it, we cannot use that tool on misdemeanors. The hate crime falls under the misdemeanor rules of evidence. it is also a specific intent crime. So unlike general intent crimes such as if you fire a weapon into the air, everybody should know that the bullet's going to come down and hurt somebody. So you don't need to prove that the person who shot the gun up into the air wanted to hurt someone. When it comes to bias-motivated crimes, you have to prove that that is the intent. And that is part of the reason why investigating, classifying, and prosecuting these cases is so difficult. Without direct or circumstantial evidence, we must get the suspects to waive their Fifth Amendment rights and admit to the bias motivation. It does not matter the victim's perception. We need the suspect's perception. We have many cases where a victim was mistaken for having a protected characteristic when they don't, or belonging to a different protected characteristic, but it doesn't matter what the victim thinks. It matters what the suspect thought. While we do have standalone hate crime statutes in California, and in a lot of them, they're low-level misdemeanors. So we cannot charge the low-level misdemeanor if there's a higher crime, because double jeopardy applies. They can plead out to the lower one, and then we cannot charge the higher one. So this is also some issues that come up. The term hate can be misleading. When used in hate crime law, the word hate does not necessarily mean rage, anger, or general dislike. It can mean bias against people or groups with specific characteristics. This can be a pre-existing negative attitude, such as animosity, resentment, revulsion, contempt, fear, paranoia, thrill-seeking, other things. It doesn't have to be disgust or hate to meet the bias motivation. Now, there have been several folks up here who have talked about hate incidents. Legally, there is no such thing as a hate incident. We know about it because this is what we do. Most people don't know that. Legally, there's no such thing as a hate incident, and the vast majority of police departments across the country, over 99%, will not complete a hate incident report. They show up, tell the victim who has just had one of the worst days of their lives, free speech, First Amendment, and they drive away. My department and others are some of the few that do take it, but it is not a common thing. The federal agencies do not take hate incident reports. My time is up. Just last thing I'll talk about is the reason that we take hate incident reports is because we're trying to focus on the victim-centered approach. Victim-centered approach is a way of dealing with victims of crimes instead of the old just the facts, ma'am, and I'm going to chase after the bad guy. It's slowing things down and trying to get the victim the assistance, the help, connection to the advocacy groups that can assist them best before we run off and chase the bad guy. So I tried to keep it short, so you have, if you guys have any questions, but I did all
Thank
the
you,
time, so.
Detective Martinez. Next, Chief Scott. Chief, can you hear me?
Thank you. Good. Yes, I can. Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
By the way, before you begin, I just want to note for the record that Commissioner Jones has joined by Zoom. Go ahead, Chief.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to use my time to talk more of a high level about the hate crimes in general and some of the ways that we believe we can all work together as a community to address hate crimes and what comes along with it. Yeah, the first part of my comments, I'm going to paraphrase, not quote directly from our Attorney General, Rob Bonta, on what hate crimes actually are. You know, crimes motivated by hate are not just attacks on individual people, they are attacks on our community, our entire community. On May 11th, 2021, our California Attorney General Bonta declared a state of crisis as heightened hate crime violence in the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities reverberated and continue to do so in some respects across the state. Meanwhile, in 2020, late 2020, California reported the highest number of hate crimes of any state, with 1,017 bias-motivated crimes against the victim's race, ethnicity, ancestry, gender identity, religion, disability, or sexual orientation. As been stated by many of the speakers, hate crimes are criminal acts where victims are targeted because of their group identity or perceived identity, such as race, national origin, religion, or another group characteristics. Hate crimes convey a message to both the victims and their group or perceived group that they are not welcome and not safe. And as such, these crimes are an attack on the fundamental rights of our communities at large. So it's vital that law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, and the community that tries to combat these types of crimes recognize what hate crimes are and respond appropriately. Here in San Francisco, we believe that an effective response to hate crimes has a multifaceted, multi-component response mechanism. And I'm going to start with community engagement. No effort to address hate crimes and incidents would be complete without community engagement and collaboration between both community-based organizations, government organizations, and, of course, our prosecutorial agencies, both at the local, state, and federal level where applicable. Media plays a big role in communications on how we address hate crimes and really relaying the message to the communities at large that these crimes are given the utmost seriousness in terms of the response, in terms of how we see them as society, and how we try to combat and prevent them. When this is done effectively, community members see the visible signs that our communities and our governments are working together in order to do everything necessary to both prevent and combat hate crimes, intervene on those that perpetrate these type of acts, and hold those that do perpetrate these types of acts accountable. Victims advocacy and victims' rights are part of our response here in San Francisco. And as far as, the San Francisco Police Department, when we saw a tremendous increase in hate crimes in 2021, which our reported hate crimes doubled, one of our responses was to enhance victims' advocacy and victims' rights by standing up a community liaison unit specifically for the purpose of connecting victims and their families to services, to provide a support network, and to send a clear message to members of our communities that we are there for them when these crimes occur. Because on the backside of that and the flip side of that, we do know, and I don't think this is germane to the city of San Francisco or the state of California, that many of these crimes go unreported for a variety of reasons. And without that advocacy, without that support, we think that situation will be worse. There is a component of hate crime response that really deals with immigration and the fear of people reporting crimes because of their immigration status. And in most communities, at least this community, we make sure that people understand that immigration status has no value of whether or not a person can report a crime. We welcome and encourage every member of our community, despite immigration status, to engage with law enforcement, to engage with government, to report what is happening, because without that accurate reporting, we cannot address this issue appropriately. I know our last speaker, Detective Martinez, talked a little bit about hate incidents, and I want to speak a little bit about hate incidents and how that plays a role in this matter. As was stated earlier, hate incidents, if it doesn't amount to a violation of the California Penal Code, it's not a crime, but we do encourage the reporting of hate incidents here in San Francisco because we believe that that is a precursor oftentimes to more serious crimes that may occur by the people that perpetrate hate incidents. We have stepped up our efforts to encourage our community members to report hate incidents. And one of the ways we do that is to make sure we can communicate with a very diverse community here in our city. We have multiple languages that are accessible by members of our community. And despite the ability of some people with limited English proficiency, we encourage them to report hate incidents as well as hate crimes. And that information can prove to be valuable down the line in the event that arrests are made and prosecutions are at play. Those hate incidents sometimes proves motives. So that is something I think that is really an emerging issue in many jurisdictions of how we report and how we capture those hate incidents. I do believe there's work to be done on that front in terms of having systematic ways to do that. And we can all learn from each other on how we do that best. The last thing I want to talk about is our reporting of hate crimes in general and where we are on that and what I believe we can do to improve in that area. As we have tracked our hate crimes here in our city over the last 6 years, we've seen pretty much post 2020, post the global pandemic, a sharp rise in hate crimes in 2021, and then we saw a sharp decrease in 2022. What we do know is that the reporting of hate crimes, as we nationwide change our reporting system to the National Incident-Based Reporting System, that we hope to have better data on reporting. I do have the opinion that without the data to be able to really track the patterns of hate crime, to really be able to track what is fueling hate crimes and hate fuel violence, that we're behind the curve if we don't have basic, consistent, robust reporting systems. And I'm hopeful that with the implementation of NIBRs across the United States, that our reporting will be more consistent, our reporting will be more accurate, where we really understand the data and what's fueling and what the patterns are in hate crime. And that's one thing that I believe in at least in our city, we're building that infrastructure to do just that, to be NIBRs compliant. We hope within the next year and a half or so. And we hope that our data and the data that we share with others is more robust. So we have a way to not only track the data, but track the indicators and the things that we know that will help us really try to crack the code, if you will, on addressing hate crime in a holistic way.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Our next witness is former Commissioner Michael Yaki, who is the principal reason why we're having this hearing. Commissioner, can you hear us?
I can indeed, Mr. Chair.
Proceed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, my name is Michael Yaki, and I am the reason that you're sitting there right now, so you can blame it all on me. After 17 years, it's very different, sort of being on this side of the panel, but I'll do my best to just take a few moments and let you have more questions for the esteemed panelists who are here today. I'm not going to try and inundate you with facts and figures and everything that you've heard today, and I think you've heard a lot. But I will say this: the reason I wanted to put this forward is not just because of what we saw during the COVID epidemic, not just because we saw the President of the United States referring to this as the Chinese flu and giving license essentially to characterize a terrible affliction spreading across this country that was killing hundreds of thousands of people by blaming it all on China, but because it goes to something deeper and very fundamental and personal to who I am. My father is a Japanese American. His family was incarcerated during World War II. His Family possessions were taken from him. His family farm was sold. This is something that was a defining moment for who my father is. A father who nevertheless rose up from that to become the highest ranking career diplomat at that time for an Asian American in the United States Foreign Service. But he grew up experiencing racism firsthand. And this is racism that came from before. I mean, this is something that started essentially in the 1800s with exclusion acts, with the discrimination, the segregation of the Chinese in San Francisco, with the fact that my mother, who came to this country not as an immigrant, but as the daughter of a Chinese diplomat, marooned essentially in Los Angeles because of the war in the Pacific occurring that just started, Pearl Harbor, and they couldn't get back to where he was being recalled back to China. Because she was Chinese, because her family was Chinese, they tried to deport her because of the Chinese Exclusion Act at the time. Luckily, that didn't occur, otherwise I wouldn't be here today. But the animus against Asians has been an unfortunate part of the history of this country for quite some time. And I've always believed that it's just there scratching the surface. And it comes up again even today when you have a member of Congress challenging the loyalty of Congresswoman Judy Chu to serve and view classified documents because, quote unquote, she has loyalties to China. There's something that has been unique about our American experience, about the experience of Asian Americans in this country, in which somehow we are always seen as the other. We're always seen as having our loyalty questioned, where we are sent en masse into the desert and other hellholes during World War II, because out of all the nationalities, out of all the ethnicities in this country, many of whom had relatives or cousins or whatever fighting against us on the other side in the Axis, only the ones who looked or had my kind of surname were put into camps in this country. Somehow or another, it's our loyalty that's always been questioned. It's our commitment to this country that's always been put at doubt. And what I hope, what will come out of this, what I hope all of you will be doing as you work through this, is coming up, working with, and taking something like the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act and seeing that it really does what it's supposed to do. Working with state and local governments to get out public education campaigns and really start getting to the core of this, because a lot of people have touched upon it in different ways, and I agree with some of what even people who I would vehemently disagree with who have spoken today, is that it's somehow easier to pick us out for the purposes of discrimination. And this commission, its mission is to combat exactly that. We've done it before, we can do it again. I thank all of you for the work that you're doing. I commend all of you for it, and for the people who I served with for 17 or so years who are still on the commission. It's a pleasure seeing all of you again. To the new ones, congratulations. This is a great body to work with, and I wish you all the best. But keep in mind that there is at its core a mission about this particular investigation. And that is, how do we deal with the fact that when the critical times come, somehow or another, our loyalty as Americans is always questioned, and somehow or another it gives license to people to commit heinous acts of violence against us at a time when, as all Americans, we should be working together toward that brighter future, toward that great unification to the better angels of our nature every single day. So thank you very much for the time to appear before you today, and good luck in your continuing mission.
Thank you, Commissioner Yaki, and thank you for your long service and for instituting this very hearing. I'll now open it up to questions. I think I'll take the first one as privilege of the chair. To Mr. Dryband, when you were at Civil Rights Division, were there colleges other than Harvard and Yale that were engaged in the kind of conduct that you just described with respect to Harvard and Yale?
Yes.
And approximately how many were there, if you know?
I don't know the number, but I think the Department of Education was investigating several other colleges and universities, as well as the Department of Justice. The practices that I described that were occurring at Harvard and Yale were not atypical. I mean, they were, there was a view, I think, in higher education today that when it comes to race discrimination, that colleges and universities can do whatever they want. That's the attitude that we saw. And I'll give one example just from the Yale case. When we notified Yale of our determination that Yale violated the Civil Rights Act, we made a proposal to Yale to settle without litigation. And we suggested that for 1 year, due to what we regarded, and I think correctly, as Yale's unlawful and pervasive use of race in higher education admissions to Yale College, that they stop using race for 1 year, and if they wanted to use race thereafter, that they make a narrowly tailored proposal to use race that was limited in time. Yale responded to us in writing by saying, one, they don't discriminate on the basis of race, which is blatantly untrue, and two, they were going to continue using race, and they insisted they would continue using it eternally. There was no indication in anything that I saw that any of the colleges or universities that we investigated ever intended to stop using race and engaging in race discrimination.
You indicated that the 2 cases were dropped by the Biden administration. What about the investigations that you said were pending? Do you know what the status of those are?
I don't have access to either the Justice Department's investigative inner workings or the Education Department's, so I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams?
Chief Scott, I hope you can hear me. Good. Does the San Francisco Police Department collect any other precursor event information or pre-crime data in San Francisco, like police confronting citizens on the people confronting citizens on the street, maybe mental health events that occur in public, disturbances of the peace or the public, or anything at all like that? Does the San Francisco Police Department collect other precursor data?
Well, we do collect, hate incident data. I mentioned that a bit in my opening remarks. But those other types of events, let's say person in mental crisis and things like that, it's captured in and of itself. But if there's an element of it, of hate that may not amount to a hate crime, we do document that information and push that information forward. And it could be captured in a number of ways. So we capture it all, everything that you mentioned. But as far as hate itself, we do have prejudice-based incident reporting that don't amount to crimes. And then those hate crimes that meet the statutory elements of a hate crime that are in their own reportable category.
Right, but I'm asking for the opposite, the things that are not hate crimes. Does the San Francisco Police Department collect data on other public disturbances in a systematic way, maybe, incidences of vagrancy or other disturbances of the peace at all?
Yes, disturbances of the peace, those are collected and reported. And if they don't amount to crimes, we have to rely on our computer-aided dispatch or our dispatch information. But if they amount to crimes, then we will take an incident report, or our officers will complete an incident report. For instance, the disturbances of the peace. Those types of things are collected and reported in both ways.
Commissioner Garza, or was it Commissioner Nurse? Okay.
It's nice to see you all here, gentlemen. I'd like to focus on what Detective Martinez said about the difficulty of completing the hate crimes forms. And he indicated that a large percentage were not completed. Does that suggest to you what kind of reform would be needed to get police to actually fill them out? Is it a backward flow? If the prosecutor won't take the case, then the police don't want to write the report? Or how can one solve that problem?
That's part of
training.
I believe that a more across the board philosophy from the top down will change the way that the departments and therefore the officers view these things. Let me give you an example. If I am driving and someone cuts me off and I block them in and start yelling at them, and then I spit on them, I've committed a battery. Now, the same exact set of facts, it is an LGBTQ person. I do exactly the same thing, but before I spit on them, I start throwing out anti-LGBTQ slurs or anti-Asian slurs or whatever. Most officers won't even take into consideration the slurs, the bias that there is evidence of because it is due to the road rage. But to have that training and the buy-in from the top down of this is what we want to do, not in that exact circumstance, but for these type of circumstances, it'll be pushed down. And as line officers, we do what we're told, we do what our policy is, but if there's not a buy-in at the top.
Right. I mean, it is very difficult to prosecute these cases, but it is important because it's not simply a crime. It's a crime that someone feels entitled to commit because of the lesser humanity of the victim. And so it is important to get more training, it seems to me, in these circumstances. Both at prosecutorial level, we heard about for that from the last panel, as well as for officers. You obviously know this quite well. In truth, there are no thought crimes. That would be unconstitutional. I'll take that case. But there are elements, such as the context. I mean, you've used speech, but in fact, it's often the context. So if you're in front of a gay bar, let's say, and there's that would matter, but you have to train officers to look for those kinds of things, as I understand it.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And,
And finally, for the other panelists, I'll just say, I was just over at Jones Day debating someone, Professor Hamburger from Columbia. The Supreme Court's going to rule. The Supreme Court's going to rule, and I just want the record to reflect that there is no Biden administration person here. You serve the Trump administration, and we will, I'm sure, abide by the rule of law here at the Commission.
So that was.
I do have a question, if I may interject for Detective Martinez. If you could give us a little bit more background on how your officers are trained in terms of identifying those issues of what constitutes a hate crime. Because I know you mentioned in your comments about how these statutes are difficult, right? So is there a process for training your officers on how to identify them? Are you tracking that training and the results of that training? Could you give us a little bit more?
Yes, since our department is fully committed, I conduct all the trainings myself. And multiple, from the academy to the supervisors, to the detectives, to the training officers, all of them are trained beyond what the peace officer standards for California does. We train our own in these things. And recognizing that they're very difficult to prosecute, that doesn't matter to us. What matters to us is getting the victim the help that they can get at that time that the police cannot provide. We, as police, we don't do therapy. We don't do, we barely do proactive policing very well. So getting them in touch with those agencies or those advocacy groups, some that are here that can assist them with the non-criminal things that we can't, whether it's work-related or visa immigration-related, getting them in touch with those people that can help them that we cannot do.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot about language and translation services. Is that something that you all also employ in your sort of victim-centered approach?
We try. So the way that we do it is we have 42 different languages spoken in our 10,000 officers. So wherever in the city, we try to get a language speaker there, no matter where they're assigned. And if that doesn't work, we have a contract with AT&T Language Bank. We try not to use family members because of certain cultures and stuff, so we try to use our contract services, and we'll do either video or over the phone to speak in the preferred language. When we can, doesn't always work, but that's our goal.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Detective Martinez, I was interested in your answer to one of the earlier questions, and I'm interested in sort of uniformity of what gets classified as a hate crime and what doesn't. And you said that on the road rage hypothetical, which I thought was a very good one, that most officers would not consider that a hate crime. Would some?
My department will. My department counts that as a hate crime. But, maybe if it was the sheriffs of San Francisco, depending on how they are trained, they may not. For us, all we need, the way that I train my folks is, if there's evidence, whether direct or circumstantial, of the bias, we are making it a hate crime.
Hate crime. So you're erring on that side. You see, the interesting thing about the hypothetical is that often people don't know the race or sexual orientation of the person who cuts them off until they get a better look at them. And therefore, it might be one of those, it's more likely to be one of those cases where once people know it, then they act on it because they want to throw whatever epithet. Whereas there are going to be other crimes where they know right from the beginning, who the person is. And I'm interested then in, like you say, you conduct the training. Do you have written materials?
Yes.
Can we get a copy of those?
Oh, yeah, we have our policy, and I can send you my syllabus and all that kind of stuff.
Great, I would love to see that.
I try to tell my folks, it is not the patrol officers or the detective's job to determine whether it's enough to convict. If you have evidence, we're going to make it a hate crime. We're going to get the victim in touch with those services. We're going to present it to the correct deputy district attorney or city attorney that has that experience. We're going to let them decide. But in the meantime, someone who has had one of the worst days of their life because of who they love or the color of their skin or where they're from, they have a victim-centered approach. I'm sure you guys have dealt with that before. They have been taken care of in a more thorough way than a regular victim.
Yeah, the training materials would be great. In fact, can I ask Chief Scott, do you have training materials of that sort? Yeah?
Yes, yes, ma'am, we do.
Could you send them to us?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, I certainly can.
Great, thank you very much.
Commissioner Gilchrist?
That'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dryban, I wanted to thank you for your work that you did at the Department of Justice. I'm a South Carolinian, and the situation that occurred at Mother Emanuel where the 9 souls were killed, I want to thank you and in the Department of Justice for your work there in dealing with the murderer who killed those people. My question to you, the House Energy and Commerce Committee met yesterday with the CEO of TikTok and all of the rising tensions that are going on with China. Do you in any way believe that some of those tensions can at some point end up being just what we were experiencing during COVID as it relates to Asian hate crimes?
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind remarks about my service to the department. We did convict Dylan Roof of murdering people at Mother Emanuel Church, and we successfully defended the conviction on appeal. We being, there were many people involved. I was the head of the Civil Rights Division during the appeal, but many people worked on that, including people in the Obama administration and later in the Trump administration. With respect to hostilities with China and the pandemic, I think it's a very complicated question. There's the pandemic did, by all accounts, start in China, and there were concerns that we had when I was at the Department of Justice that because of the origins of it, that we wanted to alert all of our prosecutors and the FBI and law enforcement to be aware of this concern that there would be hate crimes committed against Asians and Asian Americans. And Attorney General William Barr and I instructed all federal prosecutors throughout the United States that we would not tolerate that kind of conduct. And so we increased significantly the criminal section staffing at the Civil Rights Division. That's the section of the Civil Rights Division that prosecutes hate crimes, among other civil rights crimes. and we expanded, in addition, training and things like that to other law enforcement. There are obviously geopolitical tensions between the United States and China that I think both predate the pandemic and I think are unrelated to them. So it's a complicated question, but I'm not sure if all these things are kind of somewhat interrelated in terms of anti-Asian or particularly anti-Chinese or oftentimes anti-Asian hate crimes where people are perceived to be Chinese even though they might be Vietnamese or of some other national origin.
No, thank you for that.
Okay.
Thank you all for your service and for your testimony today. Commissioner Yaki, can you just, or former Commissioner Yaki, I mean, I'm new to the commission and I have a lot to do and learn. We look at concept papers and identify current issues to look at and examine. And since you had written the concept paper, could you just help me and the commission just help me think about the original understanding in developing this concept paper, which I think was really important and serves us today?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner, and through the chair. I think this paper really came out of the rise in hate crime incidents against Asian Americans after the COVID-19 outbreak. This commission had acted previously and sent letters and notices to the White House regarding our concern about the then president's remarks concerning the virus. And yes, while it originated in China, it does not make it a Chinese issue. It does not. And again, because of the fact that historically our communities have been seen as sort of all the same. Like, let's not forget about the murder of Vincent Chin, who was killed, a Chinese American who was killed because some people thought that he was Japanese. It comes down to as simple as that. I mean, it's interesting hearing some of the testimony that we heard today regarding affirmative action, which has been pointed out by others, is going to be decided by the United States Supreme Court. And as someone, if I may speak out of school, I sort of knew this was going to happen. I had an inkling that it would because it has been something that some members of the commission have been wanting to do for quite some time. I think it's interesting because, again, there is a court case going on. It's going to be resolved one way or the other. And I'm just going to say, quite frankly, I am someone who, throughout my 17 years in the commission, supported diversity, did not vote for similar projects that would have advanced the topic that some other people on this panel and others had advanced today regarding alleged discrimination at schools. And I would just point out, just really off the cuff, that we're not talking about anyone being denied an education. This is not segregation of the education system, but that is a far different cry from someone whose life and property and family have been severely injured by a hate crime. And that is the animus and the idea that it's still there. And I do worry about the TikTok issue. I do worry about how that at this time in our nation's history, we have put forward the fact that now China is the new #1 concern in certainly in Asia, but also around the world. We see what's going on with Russia and their interaction with the Ukraine war, and how, again, people don't distinguish between someone who looks like this and someone over there in Beijing as a cause of some death or injury or inconvenience to people. That is still there, and that's what I think. That's what this report was in my view. You're different. You can do whatever it is you want to do with it, but the animus was to go and address that underlying core, which is the continuing presence of anti-Asian discrimination and how quickly it lights up at times like this.
Mr. Westhill. You mentioned that in the Biden executive order, there were 63 mentions of the word equity, or thereabouts, correct?
Correct.
Did it have a definition of equity in the executive order? And if so, what was it?
I think there is a definition in the executive order. I can't quote it here for you now. But what I think I've endeavored to do with my spoken testimony here, and certainly in my written testimony, which I hope the commission will review, is to explain what I think is obvious about what equity is. Equity is the goal of pushing some people artificially forward and bringing some others back. I suggest that that's the two sides of the equity coin. It's immoral, it's illegal, and I do think it's something that this commission could speak out about. I don't remember, again, what exactly the definition was that was used by the executive order, but I think the actions of the Biden administration's equity agenda, and also how it's crept into other areas of American life as well, makes it clear what it actually is. It's preferences for some based on their race or ethnicity or other immutable characteristics, and to hold back others because they do not fit the criteria for what the outcome needs to be for proportional representation. And if I could, just one additional statement regarding the Supreme Court cases on affirmative action. I find it peculiar indeed that anyone would think that just because the Supreme Court's going to rule on the affirmative action cases that this is all done. I don't think, based on actually some comments of my co-panelist, Mr. Dryban here, that schools care very much at all about what the Supreme Court's going to say. I think, and we've seen some signs of it already, that they're going to try and skirt the law and do as they please to make their campuses more skin-deep diverse, which has been their goal from the beginning. Moreover, this commission is worried about civil rights. If the Supreme Court, as a lot of commentators have predicted, prohibits the use of race in making admissions decisions, it's all the more important for this commission to be reviewing and making sure that they're being held to the standard that Title VI holds them to, that they cannot, that it prohibits the consideration of race in federally funded programs. So this commission's job becomes even more onerous if the Supreme Court does what many commentators think they're going to do, which is prohibit race in college admissions.
Mr. Dryban, of the statutes that the Civil Rights Division is charged with enforcing, say Title VII, 42 U.S.C., 1981, Title IX, all the titles with respect to civil rights, is there a definition of equity, to your knowledge, in any of those?
No.
I'd like to make just an intervention here. If you open up your iPhone, you can find the definition of equity, the quality of being fair and impartial. I understand you believe it means outcome. There's a difference here, but that's what my dictionary says, and the Supreme Court likes dictionaries these days.
But the word equity does not appear in a single statute passed by the United States Congress about civil rights issues, at least certainly that is enforced by the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department. It's not part of the United States Code at all. And that's why it's not defined anywhere in the U.S. Code that I know of anyway.
Commissioner Harriet?
And I'm going to direct this to Mr. Westhill because he mentioned it in his testimony. The Vice President has indeed said what she believes equity means, hasn't she? What did she say again?
She has on a couple of different occasions. The most recent having to do with the executive order that was signed just, I believe, last month, that America is a promise of equity and justice for all. Today, the president signed executive order, puts our nation one step closer to that, which I think is a change on the Pledge of Allegiance's liberty and justice for all. But the vice president has commented on this before as well in our official Twitter account. She said that there's a big difference between equality and equity. Equality suggests, everyone should get the same amount. Equitable treatment means we all end up in the same place.
Commissioner Magbante?
Mr. Dryban, just a quick question, and thank you for your service to the Trump administration. And in the case involving the ones that you worked on, could you define what is an Asian?
I'm sorry, in what case?
What is an Asian?
What is an Asian? Asians are typically referred to people whose ancestry or national origin is from the continent of Asia.
The only reason why is that it is a very large and diverse community, which some segments encounter poverty, limited English proficiency. And I'm just curious in the court papers if it is recognized, the nuance and diversity that we seek to seek in America. Like our schools should be, skin color, whatever, but there is a diversity of experience and insights. Isn't there within the Asian community?
Of course there is, and that's why this whole notion of grouping populations of people together the way many colleges and universities and other institutions today are doing as, quote, Asians, I think is shameful, disgraceful, and illegal. So yes, there's a huge range of diversity among people whose ancestry is from Asia, among people who are from East Asia or South Asia or various parts of Asia. And I think it's horrible that our institutions in this country today treat these individuals as if they are part of some monolithic group and then subject them to pervasive discrimination. And it's even worse because we're talking typically about 18-year-old children who are applying to further their education at colleges and universities throughout this country, many of whom come from very poor families, many of whom are first-generation arrivals to this country, and they are lumped together and disadvantaged by Ivy League institutions, by all kinds of institutions in this country, and it is a total disgrace, in my opinion, and it's illegal and immoral and wrong and should stop.
And that's in your papers.
What?
And that's in your papers. Your litigation papers, yes?
Well, in the cases that I mentioned, yes, we made those allegations, yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to assert my authority under 45 CFR 701.11, and I want to remind all commissioners that they voted for the concept paper on hate crimes against Asian Americans on September 16th, transcript page 40. Research timeline voted on October 21st, transcript page 32. An amendment to add admissions of Asian American status to colleges and universities failed by a vote on September 16th. Our conversation and the point of testimony today is limited to the four corners contained in the concept paper. So I'm going to submit the concept paper and the timeline for the record. So thank you.
I apologize for my question if it was not appropriate, not germane to the topic.
Yes, it was.
Any other questions from commissioners? Panelists, I want to thank you. That will conclude this briefing.
Thank you.
And we appreciate the testimony of everyone who has participated in this briefing today. The record will be open for 30 days in which you can submit further comments. Members of the public are invited to do so also, and they may be emailed to, I'm going to take this down, anti-Asian hate crimes at usccr.gov. That is ANTIASIANHATECRIMES at usccr.gov. And please submit your comments by April 24th. And with that, the briefing is concluded.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.